Sophie had always loved old houses. There was something about the history they carried, the unique architecture, and the hidden stories within the walls that fascinated her. So when she found a two-story Victorian house for sale in a quaint small town, she couldn't resist. It was exactly the kind of place she had always imagined living in, with tall windows, decorative moldings, and a garden that, although in need of care, had the potential to become something enchanting. As soon as she moved in, Sophie began restoring the house, staying true to its original style. She painted walls, polished wooden floors, and spent hours at antique markets, searching for furniture that matched the ambiance. The house, which had been empty for many years, soon began to come alive again. But as she spent more time there, little things started to catch her attention. Things that, at first, she tried to ignore, attributing them to coincidences or the natural aging of the structure. It was common to hear creaks at night, especially in an old house like that. Sophie knew this and wasn't easily shaken. But some sounds were different, slow, heavy footsteps that seemed to cross the upstairs hallway where the bedrooms were. The first time she heard it, Sophie was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The sound of something or someone walking upstairs made her stop, knife suspended in the air. She stood still, listening intently. The sound continued, as if someone was moving from room to room. When she went upstairs to check, she found the bedrooms empty, the doors closed just as she had left them. Sophie tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was just the sound of the wood settling, or maybe an animal had taken up residence in the attic. But as the days went by, the noises became more frequent. The most disturbing was the sound of scratching on the walls, as if something were trying to get out. These sounds always came from one of the upstairs bedrooms, one Sophie hadn't yet finished restoring. It was a room she avoided, not out of fear, but because the energy there felt different. It was hard to explain, but every time she entered that room, she felt a slight unease, as if something was off. Determined to understand what was happening, Sophie began researching the history of the house. She spoke with older neighbors and visited the local library, where she found old newspapers and records dating back to the late 19th century, when the house was built. She discovered that the house had once been inhabited by a wealthy family, the Hendersons, but that one of the sons, a boy named William, had died young. The cause of death was never clarified, and soon after the family left the house, which remained empty for many years until it was sold to other owners. William's story intrigued Sophie. She wasn't someone who easily believed in ghosts, but the coincidences were many. She decided to visit the local cemetery, where she knew the Henderson family was buried. There, she found William's tombstone, confirming his untimely death. The grave was simple, but there was a sadness Sophie couldn't ignore. She found herself wondering if the presence she felt in her home could be the restless spirit of that boy. That night, while reading a book in the living room, Sophie heard the footsteps upstairs again. This time, the sound was followed by a faint cry, almost inaudible, but she could swear it was coming from William's room. Her heart raced, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Still holding the book, she slowly climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached the top, the sound abruptly stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence. Determined to face whatever it was, Sophie went to William's room. The door, usually closed, was slightly ajar. She pushed it open slowly and entered. The room was cold, much colder than the rest of the house. The hallway light barely illuminated the space, but it was enough for her to see that there was no one there. Yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Sophie stood in the middle of the room, her eyes scanning the walls, until something in the corner caught her attention. A shadow, darker and denser than the others. Sophie felt the air around her grow heavy, and for a moment she thought she might faint. But then, the shadow moved slowly, and she heard that faint crying again. It was a sound that seemed trapped in time, repeating itself endlessly. Sophie wanted to run, but her legs were rooted to the floor, as if the room had a hold on her. Trying to stay calm, she whispered the boy's name, William, hoping for a response but not sure what she wanted to hear. To her surprise, the crying stopped, and the room seemed to warm slightly. The shadow in the corner dissolved, and Sophie felt that something had changed. She was no longer afraid, but rather filled with a deep sadness, as if she shared in the pain of that young spirit. She felt a connection, a need to help somehow, the soul that was trapped there. In the following days, Sophie decided to dig deeper into William's death. She returned to the library, scoured more records, and even spoke with a local historian. She discovered that William had died from a sudden illness, something that couldn't be treated at the time, but that left the family devastated. The mother, in particular, never got over the loss, and there were rumors that she spent hours sitting in William's room, waiting for some sign from her lost son. Determined to help, Sophie invited a respected medium from the area to visit the house. The medium, an elderly man with an aura of wisdom, walked through the house in silence, sensing the energies that inhabited it. When he reached William's room, he stopped and closed his eyes, as if listening to something Sophie couldn't hear. After a few minutes, he turned to her and said, "He's here, trapped between this world and the next, still searching for his mother." The medium suggested a ritual to help William find peace, something involving candlelight, prayer, and a request for release. Sophie, though skeptical, agreed. That night, she and the medium performed the ritual in William's room. As they recited the ancient words, Sophie felt a presence beside her, as if William were there, listening. She closed her eyes and, for the first time, spoke directly to the spirit, telling him that he could go, that it was okay. The room seemed to fill with a soft light, and Sophie felt a wave of calm wash over her. When she opened her eyes, the room was warmer, and the feeling of sadness had vanished. The medium smiled at her and said that William had found peace. Sophie couldn't be sure, but she felt that something had indeed changed. That night, for the first time since moving in, she slept deeply, without disturbing dreams or unexplained noises. In the months that followed, Sophie's house became a place of serenity. She completed the restoration of William's room, transforming it into a cozy, bright space. She never heard the footsteps or crying again, but whenever she passed by the room, she felt a calm, comforting presence. She knew that in some way, William was finally at peace, and that brought her a sense of fulfillment. The experience changed Sophie. She, who had previously been fascinated only by the physical and historical aspects of old houses, now understood that places carry more than just material memories. They also carry the energies and emotions of those who lived in them. And sometimes those energies need help finding their way. Sophie continued her life in the Victorian house, knowing that she and William now shared a bond that transcended time and space.